And we are live on YouTube. Hello, I'm Jen Toksvig from the Larder, and I'm joined by the wonderful Alan from Slung. Say hello, Alan.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks so much for this. I really appreciate you coming to chat to me. So we're doing this tiny shows thing, and it's all a little bit crazy, and it's happening in a big building in the city that used to be a house. I think it kind of has a room that looks a bit like a ballroom. So I think it used to be, you know, one city house with one's house in the city with a ballroom, because you want that. And then I think it became offices, and now it's empty and being used by several theatre companies, one of whom is So and So Arts. So we're going to this amazing building, and it's just empty rooms, and we're going to put on these tiny little shows. So I wondered if you would talk to me a little bit about what it means to you to make work in unusual, unconventional spaces, and maybe tell us a little bit first about Slung's work and how that came about in terms of making site-specific work.
Yeah, definitely. We make work in non traditional spaces almost entirely for pragmatic reasons.
Okay.
So originally it started because there were an awful lot of people in the company around the time we were doing a devising project with about 30 people in the company, and the studios that were available to us at that point in our careers wouldn't fit 30 people in, let alone 30 people performing. And so we took over what would later become a Pizza Express in Bradford town centre, but was huge, and its hugeness was why we moved in, and we made our work there. And we could have been anywhere huge. It could have been in a gymnasium or an empty swimming pool or anywhere. But the thing that really stayed with us and that changed our trajectory as a company was that nobody came to see this thing. I mean, it was terrible, and there was no money for marketing. But then we would go outside, and because we're in the city centre, we would walk out into the square, and there would be people in Starbucks, or there was a group of goths by a fountain, and we'd say, "Will you come and have a look at this thing that we've just done?" And saying to people, "Will you just walk 50 yards to this thing we've just done?" and not calling it a play and not taking them to a theatre meant that for what was a really bad experimental piece of theatre, we had an incredibly unusual audience. And so we've tried to hold on. There's been some changes to that. We've tried to hold on to that that sense of the unusualness of the space gives us a different audience and gives us a different relationship with the audience. And so it's an incredibly pragmatic thing for us.
I'm really interested that there's a difference, isn't there? Sorry, I'm making notes, which is wonderful. I'm really interested that there's a difference between we've made a thing, would you like to come and see it? And we've made a thing, will you come and have a look? Those are two different things, aren't they? Two different invitations. And we've made a thing, would you like to come and see it? Ooh. It's a yes/no choice, isn't it? It's a do I want to see a thing right now? No, I'm busy, or no, I'm in the middle of, or no, that's not my kind of thing. But we've made a thing, will you come and have a look? Is a will you help us by contribution to our thing that we've made? And that's a very different question. That for me is a much easier yes. Yes, if you need someone to come and have a look, of course I will come and have a look. Yeah.
It's also about who curates that space in a really immediate, like a practical sense. So if you're in a theatre, the people who curate that space, we were talking about this yesterday, it's front of house teams, they're managers, they're bars, they're people who are trained and brilliant. That's a very different thing than going into a space where me and you might be there saying, we've made this thing, will you come and have a look at it? And that's a relationship. And that relationship can still be transactional. There can still be money involved. There can still be the press involved. There still can be critical analysis, but it's a different thing.
It's a different invitation. And also, it's interesting then that because I know that Slung do pay what you. No, how do you phrase it? It's not pay what you want. It's
what you decide.
What do you say?
Pay what you decide.
What you decide. That's right. And I think that is also a very specific invitation, isn't it? It's not pay what you think it's worth. You're then asking them to very specifically place a financial value on it.
Yeah.
It's not pay what you can, because that's again a very different question. It's pay what you choose, how you judge, what you should pay for this experience that you've just had,
Yeah.
which is an invitation for people to make their own decision about how to decide that, which is genius.
It's about putting the audience with some sort of authority and control.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
One of the obstacles to coming to the theatre we found is that people don't feel like it's a place for them, or they feel somehow undermined by the whole cultural experience. And there are lots of other ways. This is just one of a number of dozen tiny little things we do that goes, no, you're in charge, you're the boss, how can we please you? And I quite like that.
Yeah, I like that too, but it's not just about that, is it? Because you decide what to pay is also it's not just you're in charge of this decision, it's also you're in charge of the process, of shaping the process.
Yeah.
Because you're not just in charge of deciding what to pay, you're in charge of deciding why you're going to pay that amount. So it adds to your experience in terms of being an audience member, because you're not just going, oh, and that's what I could afford, or you're not just going, oh, and then they asked us to pay what they thought it was worth. You're going, and then they asked us to decide what to pay, and I thought, well, this, and that was my process of deciding, so that's wonderful, because it opens up the entire process to the audience.
Yeah.
My work is I've been trying to find new ways to name things, because I'm not comfortable with front of house teams. It has a fourth wallness about it that makes me uncomfortable. And I'm currently going with providers. So people who provide if you need a drink, they'll provide you with that. If you need to know where to go, where the loos are, or what you're allowed to do as an audience member, or any of those, if you need permissions of some kind,
yeah,
there are people there who will provide that for you. So it's interesting to me that that there is a thing, isn't there, of this is what we're providing for you, but you also can provide things, and what you provide, like the decision of how to pay, it affects all of us as well. I'm interested that there's provision in the space.
Yeah.
So we've slightly sidetracked from build the spaces. So the space itself, you originally chose somewhere big because it could accommodate a lot of you, and that's amazing. And also you chose a non-fourth wall space. So talk to me a little bit about the fourth wallness of theatre.
So we move audiences. So for a long time, one of the definitions of the work we made was that audiences would travel through stories, and so that they were the thing that moved and the show was the thing that stayed still. And then that's changed slightly now. So the show and the audience move, and I'm very excited by real places and how. So this started originally. We made a vampire show, and we made it in a multi-story car park.
Yay!
A multi-story car park is the closest you get to a horror film set without having to do any work. It's already there. It's already there. So the idea of and Tassel Stevens talks very brilliantly about this, about what is and what if. And we look at a place and go, what is here, and what if we do this one thing? So what is here in a multi-story car park is, you can think of all the adjectives that immediately come to mind, and what if it's peopled by vampires, and then you're off to the races. That can become more complicated than that, but fundamentally the mechanics of that thought is still the same. What is here and what if? And then work in recent years has taken place in town centres, so that the sheer act of putting on a play in the middle of York town centre becomes political, because the political landscape of York in an evening is that the place is given over to stag do's and hen do's and the speedy transaction of money for alcohol as quickly as possible, and that's perfectly legitimate, but it's not the only culture that can happen in a place. And so the act of standing with an army of 180 performers and saying, no, this is our space, we will claim it for ourselves, becomes inherently political. So the next show, which is a new version of The King Arthur Myth, will see a community of people talk about the politics of making a perfect society in a disunited kingdom. That is inherently political. The play is political, but the act of standing in a city centre and saying, we're talking about this now, is a political one. And so the space itself has a meaning. So
what's interesting about that is the town centre is a town centre, but what's describing it in the situation of a Saturday night out drinking is the people and the activity that is going on in it. They have already described that space. You're right, that's a claiming, isn't it? They've already claimed the space, and as soon as you come in and try to claim it from them in some way, or shift the description of the space, that is political. Yeah, it is. It's slightly aggressive as well. How do you deal with that? How are you unashamedly making that claim, or are you manipulatively making that claim, or how do you approach that? Because that's an invitation in itself, isn't it? How do you make that invitation?
I think we do both. We do both. I was just about to deny that I'm not aggressive, and I don't think that's true. I think sometimes we just stand our ground, and I think that the offer has to be to both our audience who have paid for a ticket or got a ticket, and also this other group of people that are the public who quite reasonably are like, oh, what's this? And that the show and actually this providers. The providers have to be there to ensure that, there is enough room in the mechanism so that they can be folded in if they wish, and also enough room in the space that if they don't want any part of it, they don't have to.
But there's so I've been calling that outer space because I'm currently writing a show set in outer space, and I really want to make it massively immersive. And I'm not sure it is going to end up being massively immersive because we're in a venue that is specifically built fourth wall. But anyway, in my reimagining of it, in my dream world where I wrote my outline that was anything I could want it to be, I always make permission for, have permission in the space, an invitation in the space for people who don't want to be in any way immersed. And I put a balcony around the outside and called it outer space. So now I keep referring to that as outer space. I think there should always be an outer space where you can look that far away from the immersive part of it, from the stars looking down.
If you imagine it as a circle, there's someone in the middle talking, and there's a group of people around her who are listening.
Yeah,
and then
or maybe talking to her.
Yeah, absolutely. They're in a bubble, and there are a group of people who stand on the outside of that bubble, whose job it is to protect that bubble and say, "Would you like to come in? Fine. Would you like to go away? Fine. But what you can't do is you can't break the bubble.
No, you can't. You cannot. That's brilliant.
We will, and at that point, we have been known. I mean, in previous past, we've had all sorts of troubles with cars driving at the show and all sorts of things, and we are absolutely steadfast. If you try to break the bubble, we will stop you. But up until that point, please come into the bubble. Please ignore the bubble. These are both options that are available to you, but you cannot break the bubble. It helps that my team is 200 strong. I like, we will win.
We will win.
We will win, and that gives us great confidence.
Does the bubble constitute fourth wall? Is the bubble an alienating presence sometimes?
No, so the performers have to recognize the audience. We're in the same space. You have to have a role. Your role is passive, so you might simply be the people who are watching the storyteller. But I recognize that you're here, and I say welcome. Thank you so much for coming to hear my story. You might be placed in the world.
So who is saying that welcome? It's because this is a continuous exploration for me as well, because I have rooms full of audience with a TS on the end, is the name I'm currently giving them, because they're all individuals, and some of those individuals want to talk to the characters and some don't. But so we have to allow the characters, I call them invisible friends. So the characters have to acknowledge that there are people in their world that they can have asides with and secret friend moments with. For me, the characters currently are populated, their world is populated with invisible friends, and invisible friends behave the same way socially as normal friends. If you meet a stranger, you either make a friendship of some kind with them, or you don't make a friendship of some kind with them, or they alienate you, or whatever. You can't ignore the fact that they're there and they're real. So currently we call them secret friends. So who is acknowledging for you in the storytelling? Is it the character who's acknowledging the audience present, or is it the storyteller who is not only channeling the character but also acknowledging that the audience are there?
I think that's developed over the years, and now I would say it's the character. So the next show is 2020. That's where it's set, and we're all in 2020.
Right.
You're
okay.
That's 2020, and you're watching me from 2020. So our reality is shared.
So you're inside the bubble.
Yeah. Yeah. So and I think interestingly, there is a fourth wall in our show, but the fourth wall is behind the audience. So the fourth wall is between the audience and the providers. And so we're all in the bubble, and we're all in the same reality. So, for example, in the next show, the Queen arrives on the back of the Land Rover, and the audience immediately become the pageant audience that one might find at a pageant if the Queen they become the public of Sheffield in that place.
Ah, so they play a character, sort of.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so that's really interesting to me, because my kind of theatre making comes from my wish as a child that when I was a kid and I had difficult questions that I was ashamed to ask, so I wouldn't ask anybody who was a guide in my life, because I didn't want to seem stupid. So my wish was always that I could ask fictional characters my questions, because fictional characters aren't afraid to speak their mind, say how they feel. They'll turn to a whole room full of people and then admit their deepest, darkest secrets and how they feel about things. And I thought, oh, that's great. Fictional characters are much more open than real people, and therefore if I could just step through that fourth wall and have a conversation with them quietly, I could say those things to them, because they do that. That's mad, isn't it? Sometimes I wish I didn't tell people that. Anyway, so the goal for me in theatre making is to bring everyone into a space where that is possible for everyone. And I know that there are, most people don't want to actually have those quiet conversations with people. But if I'm talking about the relationship between in a room between the audience and the characters, I want to stay as me, as an audience member, because it's my feelings and experiences I want to talk about. And also, in some strange way, I want there to be enough reality in the show that I can take it away with me into real life, that real life bleeds in, and so on and so forth. Whereas immersive theatre, where the audience, where you turn to them and go, you, the crowd of policemen who've come to arrest me, and then suddenly as an audience member I'm being forced to be a policeman, and I don't, that's not what I necessarily care about in that moment. So I'm really interested in the audience being included in the bubble in a character-filled way.
Yeah, I think that comes from the idea of what is and what if, and in your language, the reality of that. So if we're in a square with a Starbucks, I can't pretend that it's not a Starbucks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because Starbucks is too powerful. So we did a show once in a square. There was Cafe Rouge and Bella Italia, and there was no amount of postering that would get rid of those things.
Yeah, real stories are real. Yeah,
and the world is incredibly is just much more powerful. And once you leave the theatre building, the theatre is ever going to be. Yeah. And so that's where this what is and what if. So what is there, and it's sort of 2015 capitalism with its cheap food and everything else. But what if I put an armed soldier in the middle of Cafe Rouge? Yes. How does that shift that? And all of a sudden, the entire square that previously existed in this bubble becomes part of my world now, because that soldier shifts everything. When a member of the public, who isn't the audience and doesn't even know shows going on necessarily, walks through that square and sees an armed soldier, they will inevitably behave just like a member of the public who sees an armed soldier, and then they become co-opted into my world. And so I think that's what we aim to do, and that's where the reality. In the next show, there is a character who gets beaten up really badly by the crowd, but they arrive into the scene in a minicab that looks just like an everyday minicab. There is no difference, because it is a minicab, and so whilst he's in the minicab, he's part of the real world. He's just a man in a minicab in Sheffield living. The minute we drag him out and beat him up, then we're not actually punching him in the face. But the moment where that moves from reality to, or for me, the moment when the audience go, is that part of the show? And then there's a long thought process, and they go, that is part of the show. That long arc there is where we do our best work. Normally with explosions, but not always. Where there's that, oh, I see, okay, that's part of it, that's fine.
So I do that with song. So in a way.
Yes, it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, we sing. I mean, it was really interesting to me to go, oh, immersive theatre, immersive musicals, yay. How my sister says to me, I got married recently, my sister made a speech, obviously, because she gave me away, and she said, the thing I admire most about you, Jen, is you don't just want to work in musical theatre, which is an impossible career, writing musicals. You also want to make immersive musicals, and that's completely impossible. And then we sang at my wedding. My sister organised an immersive musical at my wedding. It was amazing. Anyway, I know, right? So she suddenly handed out song sheets, and I was like, oh. But it's true that, I suppose, here's a funny thing, isn't it? That's us using the fourth wall as a tool, is it? Because there are moments where you suddenly sing and it's unreality. Someone is pulled out of a minicab and they start punching, and it's unreality. It's the unheimlich, isn't it? And you go, oh, there's a moment of unheimlich, and we get people's attention. But unheimlich does put a fourth wall in the way, in kind of, doesn't it? Isn't that a moment where you go, look, here's a thing, and you don't, in the moment of look, you don't have the time to immerse yourself in it. You don't have the time to let the bubble pass through you. You don't have the time to suspend disbelief. That's what it is, isn't it? So maybe the suspension of disbelief requires that there's a fourth wall moment, and you then have to pass through it. So the bubble isn't skin thin. It's not a film. It's a thick. It's a space, isn't it?
Yeah, we talk about ripping disbelief from the audience. Now, you can't do that over a prolonged period of time, but you can in a beat, in a moment when you've been watching something, and sometimes we will purposefully make things look theatrical and because there's a moment coming that's real, that is the explosion of Diesel into the air. That's a real thing. It's not the projection of Diesel. It's not the puppet of Diesel. It's a boom. Or for us, we also deal with large groups of people. So in the next show, there is a moment when 45 riot police that are identical to what riot police would look like will come running down the street, and that's real. Or at least it's not the projection of that. It's not puppets. It's not someone pretending. And that's that constant flipping back and forth is what I'm interested in. Where it serves the story. Yeah.
I mean, that for me, that it has to. I can't make immersive musical theatre without those moments, because it's inherent in song. As soon as music plays, as soon as someone starts singing, that's what happens. But purposely theatrical is beautiful. I've been working on a show with the wonderful Neil Ashdown. He's written a show about the First World War based on Houseman's poems, and he's set them to music so beautifully. And there's this wonderful storytelling theatricality, especially because the lyrics are poetic and all of that. So we have these beautiful moments where there's just the great stillness of drama descends, and I was really torn about thinking about how that might work, in that I was like, well, these are fourth wall moments, and I hate the fourth wall with a passion. And then I thought, actually, no, it is the great stillness of drama. There are moments where in real life we will stop and we will look and we will have those great moments. And for me, that's what you're talking about. It's that purposely theatrical moment where you just go, oh, and it doesn't have to be a song then. As soon as you've created a world in which you say to people, stuff is going to happen, and it might take you by surprise, and it might bring a moment where you can't quite bring yourself to be in it, and then we will provide you with the support you need to come into it if you would like to. We're here, we're holding that space for you, and then all of those things seem to come together, and I understand how that purposely theatrical thing helps as a tool.
Yeah, for me, at the minute, it's about James Phillips's writing. So he has this lovely phrase. I said to him once, they are going to talk like real people, aren't they? And he said, real people in a James Phillips play. And I think that's, they speak with such, at moments, such lyricism and such. So we'll have something real, we'll have violence, we'll have that kind of butchness that comes from trying to do something as it is done. And then someone will speak like they are cleverer than anyone has ever been, and that they have prepared everything they've ever said. And those two things together, it's exactly the same thing as a song. Those two things together, you go, oh, now we're in business. And I think in the past, we've had one or the other, but never quite the two together.
It's crafted. It's those crafted moments. And again, I'm questioning continuously, because I'm a writer predominantly. So I came into immersive theatre because I got bored of bits of paper, and I thought I'd much rather be in a room full of people I love. Let's just make work on our feet and see what happens. But there is that thing, isn't there, that I do have craft skills. I do. I've studied them, properly academically studied them. And how do you allow yourself to craft things in that same immersive? But of course, those are the other great moments of stillness. I just want to. I could talk to you about all of this for hours, but I don't want to move too far away from the space, and so here we have this empty building. We have this empty building, but it is a rather glorious building. It's not just a white cube roomed office block. It is actually a building with an interesting staircase, and a building with spaces that have some character to them. So what we're doing is we're bringing 30 writers and composers and 30 performers and several directors and a very multitasking me into the space. And we're making lots of teeny tiny shows that are tiny moments from a big story that I haven't told anybody what it is yet, but it will be a big story that everybody knows. And at the beginning of the weekend, I think there will be a big map on the wall with just the characters and lines drawn between them to show their relationships. Because I think the intersection of the characters' journeys and the intersection of those lines will make for interesting moments, choices of moments, rather than saying, you know, in scene 3 when so-and-so goes to the shops, write a moment for that, because that seems to me a very traditional way of breaking down a story. So I'd rather look at the relationships, and then maybe that's a little bit freer in terms of prompts. But what we're going to end up with is we're going to be spending the weekend writing in the spaces where we're performing, and we're going to be performing lots of tiny little shows next to each other. So I wonder how that's going to go in terms of clash, in terms of opportunities for collaboration, in terms of, I don't know, we're talking about, you know, not just presenting one big space where everybody's working organically together, but lots of tiny little bits.
Yeah. I think we've opted out of that problem in a number of ways in the past, because we use headphones in nearly everything we do. So we did one show when there were 9 audience groups, and each of them were hearing a different show. And so in reality, you could realistically be stood next to the performer that you couldn't hear, watching a performer that you could hear. And equally, we've done shows where small groups of audience have moved around a number of rooms and experienced different chapters, but because the headphones are on a certain track, you can't hear the other chapter. And all of that just becomes incredibly logistically complicated. And so all you're ever doing is trying to solve that logistical problem.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think we've ever made a show in which all the work is just out in the air, and you listen to it by moving closer and further away. But that's partly because we don't tend to work in, even big buildings are too small for us. If I'm not outside, I start to get a little bit panicked. So I think it almost certainly feels like there's lots of interesting moments where things could collaborate. Just thinking about 2 songs being in proximity to each other.
Yeah.
But also, it just feels like as a team, you're going to have to be so super aware of what the next person is doing.
So the immersive musicals that I make tend to be completely unmiked, completely acoustic, partly because I can't afford it. I can't afford all the equipment required for it. Yeah. But also because I want the audience to have agency over sound. So one of the things I hate about proscenium arch theatre is that you pay for a seat, you pay less if you're, you pay for a seat and you expect to be able to hear the same as everybody else is hearing, and you expect to see the same show that everyone else sees, and you expect all those precision things, and in exchange you agree to not move, not speak, not think, not think. But I find it so restrictive, and the sound thing particularly, I want the audience to have agency over how loud, how soft. My mum doesn't have great hearing now. I sometimes don't have great hearing, but then I go and see some West End musicals and they're so loud, and it's just all about the bass, and I can't cope with it. It gets in the way of the storytelling for me. So I want the audience to be able to move closer and further away and have agency over that. But it's difficult, isn't it? Because my thoughts are that, yes, the most obvious thing is that that 2 people who are next to each other doing a tiny show will collaborate with one another because they maybe are overhearing something that they're writing, and they can make that work together. And that makes me question how we should divide the space up, whether we should have specific space for certain. I had thought, 'cause we've got 3 floors, that we might have beginning, middle and end of the story so the audience can wander through. But I wonder if actually, if I'm going to group it in character, I should have specific families of characters on one floor and the next floor and the next floor, and not necessarily characters who are naturally comfortable together, but maybe we should engineer that so that the characters are not naturally comfortable together, and that might. What do you think about that?
I would, my logic would lead me to think about what the audience experience is and work backwards from there. So if you're going to let the audience in, are you going to let 100 people in and they can wander wherever they want?
Yeah,
or are you going to
pretty much exactly that. Yeah.
Then I think then it feels like if the the drawing of lines between characters and the moments of conflict should be the map of the venue.
Yeah.
So your map of how those, and rather than the map of the linear story, should be the map of the venue. So going to beginning, middle, and end will just encourage everyone to walk in one direction.
Exactly.
If in reality, yeah, if it looks like a star map, then put the star map on top of the building, and then you've got your pathways, because you want to create as many different pathways as possible. Otherwise, all the audience always do what the audience always do, which is trundle along together.
Yeah, and they follow a linear narrative path because it's the most familiar to them, and that's fine.
Yeah. So yeah, I would put your character map on top of the building, and then the devising allocation will come from that, I think.
Yeah. My other thing that in choosing to do everything acoustically is that it is possible to sing very quietly, and you can literally have somebody singing a song who the audience has to go up and actually listen to what they're whispering in order to hear it. And there's something very wonderful for me about that, because I think low volume stuff is we don't get to do low volume storytelling, other than headphones, but it stops being low volume. There's something really magical about whispering. And I've said that the tiny shows should be anything from 6 minutes long at maximum down to 6 seconds long. And I just love the idea that there might be storytellers wandering through the building, coming up and whispering a 6-second musical in your ear. That stuff just makes me really happy. So I do think there are, but I do think there are also opportunities maybe for us to record an MP3 and give it to somebody, via Bluetooth and have that going on. I do think that we should have those options. And also I think that you don't necessarily have to, I think good collective creativity doesn't necessarily mean you always have to say yes and. Actually, I think it could be that if there's two people next to each other and their songs are clashing, they could say our songs are clashing. Let's embrace, they could say yes and to embracing that clash.
Yeah.
That it doesn't have to be, oh well, let's be nice to each other and drop our volume or change what we're writing or work together. It doesn't have to always be that stuff. And I hope that we embrace some of the conflict as well in the space.
It sounds to me like big enough space for you to have options anyway. It's not like you're all in one room.
No, we have 12 rooms, I think, and some staircases and the loo, so I think I'm very much looking forward to somebody writing a musical in the loo. That's just a nice thing. What thoughts do you have about song in terms of small form theatre? How much have you guys worked with song?
Well, we work with song a lot, but very differently from you is that I don't want to leave any room for the audience to have any choice over the sound. I am an absolute sound fascist.
Are you?
Yeah, it's in there, and I want to be very clear about. And we are the most emotionally manipulative theatre company in the universe. Our composer, Heather Fenity, is brilliant, genius woman who absolutely will lead you by the nose as to what you think, what you should be feeling now, and I love that. And even shows that are 3 hours long, in your house, in your big house, you start with silence. If the entire company decides to be quiet, you will have silence. In our world, it doesn't really work. Because the city is noisy. But then also with the headphones, there's this kind of constant acoustic of noise, which disappears the minute you play music. So we don't have a silence. So we kind of all we can ever hope for is the moment of, when you hear a very loud explosion and then you get that ringing silence. We plot that into our show. So we're in moments of peace, and the rest of it is underscored. So we use and nearly always.
It's very filmic then, what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And Heather's, that's her background. I don't think she does any other theatre work but ours now. So she's just TV and film, and then and so we will often look at big cinematic sweeps, and often that work is choral, and so all of our sound is digitally created by a computer, like most people do, except for the choir, which is always recorded live, because no computer ever sounds like a group of people. I've never heard it.
So as an audience member, because if I'm standing there looking at something and listening to a choir, is that what happens? I'm never standing there looking at a choir singing. I'm always looking at something and listening to choral stuff.
Yeah, sometimes. Yes, mostly. Sometimes what we do is hide the choir in the audience. So there have been live choirs in our shows, and sometimes they're the people stood next to you, and you don't know until the end of the show that they've been singing live the whole time, or some of the time. So we had one show that ended with everyone taking their headphones off and the choir was still singing, and you realised that they'd been stood amongst you. So we play it again with that. Where is the bubble? So you don't even know who is audience and who is performer sometimes, or who is in the show and who is not in the show.
How do your audience members interact with the characters in terms of having conversations with them? Do they?
No, because the characters are radio mic'd and the audience isn't. So the other great thing is that the headphones defeat all heckling. So if we have this, if a member of the public, drunk, runs into the middle of the scene, drops his trousers, wiggles his ass and shouts some obscenity, you won't hear the obscenity, and the audience will always naturally assume that the arse belongs to the show and that somehow it's a piece of European directing on my part.
I love the idea that your ass belongs to this show. That's very nice.
All asses belong to my work.
that is Slung Low's artistic policy, right?
It's tattoo across.
Yeah, all asses are all our asses are belong to us.
Yeah.
That's great. So here's my question then. If you were to, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there is a remarkable difference. I guess my goal for an audience member is that they might have a conversation. So that's what the secret friending thing is all about. Because you kind of have to have some understanding. You have to form some kind of relationship, and you have to do it quite quickly. And this is one of the challenges we face when I make work, is that I want people to place trust. And of course, suspending disbelief is the placing of trust. So we can use that. We use theatrical tools to enable the suspension of disbelief because people recognize that as a thing, and then you've already placed some trust, and then it's easier for us to make you feel supported in the way that you could have a conversation with characters. But still, it's challenging because there is always that "don't get me involved because I'm afraid of it" thing. I don't know what you're going to ask me to do. There's all of those fears that we inherently have from people dragging us kicking and screaming through the hedge of the fourth wall. But headphones to me are sort of portable fourth walls. Would you say that's true? Does that feel true to you?
I don't think, because I think sometimes the headphones allow us to do half of your secret friend thing. There's a thing that happens where you hear internal thought vocalized, and the only other time I've seen it done really well is at the Globe, where someone says, "This is what I'm thinking," and you think they're talking just to you, and you hear it in your ear like the dramas on Radio 4. You know, that kind of that tone of voice that doesn't exist in real life.
Yeah.
Because it would actually have to be a lover right there, because there would be no other reason for getting that close to my ear.
It's what Sandy says about radio. She says on the radio, you're just talking to one person.
Yes. And sometimes we will have a character on top of a building talking to one person, and there's 600 of them. And so we get that epic sense of scale, which is kind of what we're all about. But that intimacy comes really close, I think, to being a destruction or a reduction of the fourth wall. I think the other time that the headphones do behave like a fourth wall is when it becomes cinematic. So we're pumping so much noise at you and so much all of that stuff that just allows theatre to be in a way that's really difficult to perform. So I completely accept the premise of your point, but I think there is also a reversal of that, so that you're whispering 6-second song.
Yeah.
I can do to 600 people.
Yeah, you can.
In a moment.
God, that's brilliant.
Yeah, really, really exciting. But I can't shout. We can't ever have shouting in our plays because it doesn't work. It breaks the system. The headphones just go, "Rah." So nobody's shouted in 8 years in a slow-mo show. They all have.
How do you deal with ambient sound? Are they helicopter cans, or how do you deal with ambient noise?
Yeah, they're the cheaper the headphone, the better the effect, because it smooths everything out. It just makes it all nice, and they're just. Actually, I haven't got any with me. They just sit over the ears, so they knock out about 80% of stuff. If you walk past a busker playing a guitar, you won't hear it.
Wow. So in terms of tiny shows, there are many things I want to ask you about, and I'm aware that we're slightly running out of time. In terms of tiny shows, I think that what's really interesting for me about that is if somebody does want to do a whispery thing and they do want to just make an MP3 of it and give it to lots of people. I mean, you can. It's possible to give a perambulating show to the audience when they come in, and there's a thing that they can listen to on the move, or between floors 1 and 2, or, you know, if you go to the loo, listen to this, or that. I mean, that's really interesting to me, that you can take advantage of the space without being in the space. That's beautiful. And also that, you know, while somebody's watching a story with character A, they can be listening to a story with character B, or a character B talking about character A. I'm trying really hard not to give away the big story every time I talk about this. It's on the tip of my tongue. I'm going to say it's The Wizard of Oz, because it isn't, but it gives me a reference. So if you're talking to, you know, if you're talking to the wizard, but you're hearing the Scarecrow in your head, or you're talking to the witch and you're hearing Dorothy in your head, you know, there's all of those lovely possibilities that I had not considered. So that is great. And actually, we should really properly make the most of that, of recording stuff, because also it's really quick and easy to just sit down and record something into a phone these days, isn't it? And then we can upload MP3s. Is that how we do that? And we can give people a link and say, you can download some, before you come into the space with us, you can download some tiny shows from this website.
Well, you could definitely do that. And you could also just have a headphone system, so that at any given point, we do this for conferences. Chris Good once commentated on a conference constantly, so that you're watching people talk, or you could listen to someone else talking about what they're saying. So you could have, in The Wizard of Oz, the wizard's story, which is basically a monologue, could be live. You could be constantly moving towards that secret room where you open the cupboard and the wizard's there going, hello, and you talk the entire time. And you choose to take your headphones on and go, oh.
Yeah, the joy of that, I didn't think of that at all, but that is beautiful. It's not just useful for the Robin Hood experience in Japanese, is it? It's also, there's a lovely story, which I'm just going to tell you really quickly, which my dad was a member of the European Parliament for Denmark, and he was fluent in Danish and English. So he would sit and listen to the English speakers. He would listen to the English speakers, but also listen to the Danish translator in his ear. And the English speaker said at one point, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And the Danish translator paused and then said in Danish, the vodka's good, but the meat's gone off. And it's just that joy of double storytelling. Lost in translation. And the Dane obviously getting his priorities right.
Yeah.
So talk to me about collective making, about the process that Slung does of, I know that you have specific writers and that in a more traditional way, but you also do collective making, right?
Yeah, we did a lot more of what people would term devising collectively back in the day, and now we tend to work with script. But what I would say is where we've kept our collectivity or collectivization. No, anyway, where we've kept that is in we're relatively democratic in how we make the work. And the way that expresses itself is the creative team are also the team that drive the van and the team that come in and wipe the headphones, and we do everything. So we physically make the show. So even though we're servicing a play, the last couple by James, and that probably looks quite traditional, it's also, we're still a gang that is operating the show as well as making the show. And I think that really expresses. But our background was in collective making. We just stopped doing it after a while. We weren't as good at that as we were at doing writing.
Why? What made you change?
There's a brilliant man called Matthew David Scott who set the company up with me. We made a show once, and he's incredibly clever. And he turned to me and he went, "I'm not sure what that means." And I think that's when we, and not in an interesting multiple meaning, but actually I think both of us were slightly suspicious that we'd made a show that didn't mean anything. Okay. And that was, whereas I think it was easier for us to navigate the world through writing than it was through that collective devising.
So are you saying then that your experience of collective making is that it smudges the path?
Yes, yeah, and I think that if I'm honest, my drive and in practical logistical terms, my energy's been the one driving the company rather than anybody else probably, is that my interest is in the political and the large scale and the vainglorious and the logistically difficult, and that's incredibly hard to do unless you've got a map. And that map then might be quite democratically followed, and there's an awful lot of egalitarian principles at the heart of how we operate as a company. But fundamentally, we're still got a map, because I think
I think that's really important. I made a show collectively with the wonderful Stella Duffy called the Chaos Baby Project, and it really was a collective of writers, performers, directors, you know, all kinds of us in the room, all kinds of creative professionals. And there was about, I think, a core of about 25 of us and a broader company of about 60, 70 of us. And we made it over time, and it was collectively made, and it was made in open space, and Stella led it. And without that, without having someone driving the boat and going, this is the path we're on, you know, Stella came in and went, here's an A4 piece of paper, and I've got a story, and it's based on Punch and Judy. And we stuck to that A4 piece of paper throughout, and it was our map, and we never deviated from the fact that that was our story, and it was the way that Stella had originally imagined it. And Stella worked in open space and wanted us to work in open space, and that was the thing we stuck to. And the only problems that we encountered were when we tried to deviate from that in some way. I found it the same, that that it requires, I love to open and hold spaces for people to come and work in collectively. And I think one of the things that, the thing that inspired Tiny Shows was all of these opportunities for new musical theatre writing that are very competitive. And so they become the opportunity for one person to win a big prize and 249 people to have another rejection. And that seemed to me really unfair on the 249 people. So but it takes me to say, this is what Tiny Shows is, this is how we're doing it, you know, this is what the space is that I'm holding. So I really get that. Do you feel that you are somehow making a space for makers to come into? Because the hub is that, isn't it? It feels to me like the hub is the space that you've made for as a home.
Yeah, I think our shows our big shows are a team who are on a mission, and the mission is so big that everything gets broken up into sub-teams. Yeah. So there is a movement director who will take care of large portions and will have complete creative control over that. There's a fight director, complete creative designer, but we're all on the same mission. And in that sense, it's linear. We start here and we have to be ready in 5 weeks. How you take care of your little part of the mission is up to you, and I will support you in that. Bring me back the thing I need to. So it's clicking together all the parts. The hub is different because the hub is more horizontal. So the hub is a space in which we don't, and I think this is interesting for us. We have no. This is our office. I need about as much space as this in my office, and then that's it. And I wish I could show you, but it goes on forever. It's huge, and we don't use any of it, and it's a 72-seater studio, and it's no use to us because I've got 148 people in the next show. I can't even sit the buggers down. So the space is completely useless to us in a creative sense, and that's brilliant. It's incredibly useful to us in terms of a home and a spiritual base and all those other things, and practically where to park all the vans we now own, but actually it's not creatively useful. And so the only thing we can do is give it away. And so we hold it for very good reasons that we're really clear about, and then we just give it away constantly. But the act of giving it away costs us nothing. It doesn't take a piece of us away. We're off. And I think that we've been very lucky to find that balance where, as a company, our job is to hold a space for other people to make work. And as a theatre company, our job is to go off and make that piece of theatre over there.
And what does it give you? Because it must give you something that you can give that away.
Yeah, it gives us, practically, it gives us a home, because otherwise we would just be a wandering band of freelance artists. We wouldn't be a company, we wouldn't be a gang. And I think also it gives us something that we want to be useful. And when you do what we do, we're incredibly useful to the companies of performers we work with. There's 140 of them. We're going to train them. We're going to become family with them. We're going to break bread. We're going to do the impossible. We will win, and then we will leave. And then we're going to wait 4 months to go and find some other people to do exactly the same thing. And that's okay. That's a hell of a way to live your life. But there's this gap in the middle where you go, I'm not useful today. The days we're not making work, my job is to go and find us other work to do. And that's fine, but it makes me a traveling salesman, like a bit player in a Miller play. Yeah. I don't want to be that. I want to be useful. So this is a way for us to be useful in all the other times when we're not on. Because you can't, I mean, we make 9 shows this year, but we're still not on for a lot of time. A a lot of the year we won't be in the public, we won't be working with actors, we won't be on, and this allows us to be on all the time, to be useful.
I have a thing, my new thing, it's not new actually, called Who Else? And anytime I get an opportunity in my career, because it's difficult to get opportunities in your career, I say, who else can I help? The last time I got a publishing contract for a youth theatre show, I said to the publisher, who else's work can we publish? Yay! Thanks for saying yes to me. Let's publish someone else's work with mine. Who can that be? And those conversations are sometimes easier than others. My publisher went, great, and then went, oh, no, I don't know how that works. I guess that's an ongoing conversation, but I think I love the idea that you've gone, look at this thing we've got, who else can we give it to? It's just, I think if we all went, oh, I've been given an opportunity, who else can benefit from it? That's a wonderful, wonderful thing. What can we do for you? What can we do? What could Tiny Shows do for you? Anything? What can I do for you? Are there ways that people can give alongside your giving, or give to you in some way?
Not at the minute, and I think that's a failing of ours. We don't know how to tie up. So it comes from being really practically minded, which I think is useful for 80% of the time and not the others. Yeah. So vans exist, we have keys, that's the end of that. You can have our van, there you go.
Yeah, that's easy.
I really love Arts Emergency. I think they're a brilliant thing. A brilliant charity, and I wonder whether there's an equivalent of or a sister whereby all these talents and skills can be the human skill that you have, the human talent that you have, can be shared in a way that we're currently doing with practically. We have things with plugs on the end. Somebody wants the plugs on the end. We go like that, and I think how we're developing. We've just started a writers group. We've just started a choir, and ways in which more transient skills can be passed.
I mean, I started the Larder because I had a head full of experience of writing musicals, and was lucky enough to have been published, and was lucky enough to have been produced, and when I have all this knowledge, and it seems to me that other people could make use of this knowledge, so I'm just going to tell it to them. And then it occurred to me that actually the most useful guidance I've had in my life is knowing that there's someone there I can go and ask a question of, and if they don't know the answer, because typically nobody really knows the answer to what you're asking, but most people can go, well, I think you could ask this person, or, well, when I did that, it was this. And it seems to me that especially arts leadership isn't really about leading. It's certainly not about going, do it this way. It's about going, oh, here's some information. Or, having a place, having a hub that you can go to and say, I'm trying to do this. Well, how does that work? And then have someone else go, well, this is how we do that, or I don't know, or I disagree, or any of those things are just useful. So I think I wonder if it's just an invitation to have a conversation. I wonder if that's something we can all do. The thing of saying, I'm here, if anybody wants to have a conversation about X, I might be happy to do that. That seems really simple and obvious, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's not happening, so it can't be that obvious. We must. I think there's a real I feel there's a real sense in the last few years where that exactly what you've just expressed is becoming the dominant or an increasing point of view, where we seem to be moving away from this idea of succeeding and slightly more trying. And I think it's in response to there being less money around, and also seeing the frailties of our large organisations, at least in the theatre scene, of going, wow, the idea that those guys were never going to disappear is just not true anymore. And I think then we started to look around and gone, maybe I can hold hands with these guys. This seems to me. So I think that sense of
holding hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because the buildings, I mean, this is a long conversation that we don't have time to have now, but the whole thing about theatre buildings, it used to make me angry because I would resent the fact that there were so few opportunities for me to engage with the place that was perceived to be the place where you develop work. You go to a theatre building. And actually, I am incredibly lucky that I had huge support from my local theatre growing up as a writer. So I wrote for their youth theatre, and they opened their doors to me and said, come and make work with us, is incredible for me. But I went through a phase of being angry, and then a phase of meeting people who actually work in the buildings and going, oh, I see. Okay, I see why that's a difficult relationship. And then now to the moments where I've gone, well, I need to make work. and I can't make work in the buildings. And as much as I love and respect the buildings, now that I understand that better, I need to make work, so I'm going to go outside and make it. And I'm going to go into office buildings and make it. And I'm going to, and I don't want it to be the case that we are taking away from the theatre establishment, because I don't think that's right. So I do think that there must be more opportunities for us to reach out and hold hands with the buildings as well as ourselves as makers, and to all be on that even keel. And I think there are a lot of establishments doing that actually now.
Absolutely. I mean, there are loads of great examples of how that's happening. I think also that as a blob, the arts industry, the arts establishment has reached a point where an increasing number of the creative minds and energies that could be expected to evolve, develop, support, nurture, criticize, engage with the arts establishment are just going, oh Jesus, that's too much now to put up with. I have hit my head against that wall over and over again. And it turns out, because of a slight fracturing, and loads of us, that loads of alternative people have actually built tiny little kingdoms, even if it's just a car park in South Leeds.
Yeah.
And I think what we'll find in the next 5 years is that the arts institutions are being attacked in two ways. One of which is central governments trying to diddle them in the ear, but also that the place where they would look to be renewed and re-energized and nourished by the creative energy of individuals, alternatives and mavericks are going, whoa, 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 whoa. It used to be that there was nowhere else for us, so we had to put up with your shit.
Yeah.
We don't have to put up with it anymore, so I'm going to go. And there are some people who are pushing against that, and I would, obviously Erica going to the RSC was a big deal, the shifts at the National Theatre, but that's at the very top where there is the resources to support that. As you move down the food chain, I feel sorry for the poor people who have to keep those bloody ships afloat, because it's not easy, it's not creative, and it's because they have all inherited a long list of things they have to do.
Yeah.
Before they even get to make a decision, they're screwed. They're in the corner. You must. Oh, there's no decision left. So I don't know why, as a brilliant
and also they went from being dependent on funding, on government funding, to and all of the restrictions, all of the rules and regulations all the hoops they had to jump through to qualify for that funding, and then the funding got taken away. But they had since then, it's structured their entire establishment and audience and appeal and all of the innovations they do and stuff around those specific requirements. And now they're in a place where they're up that creek, and they literally don't have a paddle. So yeah, it's hard that, and I don't want it to be that way, because people who work in arts institutions are just as creatively minded as the rest of us, do it because they love this world, and so that's really hard, that it feels like an us and them a lot of the time. That is really hard.
I've never met a lazy person who works for an arts institution. I've never met someone who wasn't giving their all, who didn't get out of bed in the morning thinking that they were changing the world just as you would when you get out of the bed. But I think that systems are so powerful. That even good people get drowned by good systems, and I think there are some really great models of how that's where I've got particularly good experience of a partner at the minute. It's a large institution who's just being really creative, but those are almost those are unique opportunities for that to happen, as opposed to they don't provide the route map for
no,
because the information is too unique.
I think we might collectively come to a new route map. I mean, it's really hard. There are lots of organisations, independent organisations that support new musical theatre writing and new writing generally. And there are some things that are hangovers from the institution sort of world, like these competitive opportunities, where people will say things like, well, competition is what there is in the world. The world is competitive, and therefore, why shouldn't our opportunities be that way? That's how it is in real life. And I just think, well, no, that's how it is in real life, because that's what we make available in real life. And we could just change that. So instead of making any competitive opportunities, let's make opportunities that allow say yes to everybody who wants to come and join. Let's say whoever comes are the right people. And, then what would happen? What would happen then? It's that what if, isn't it? It's that here's what is right now. What if instead we did that? And those ships are just as hard to slow down and turn around. And it's not that the people who are involved aren't equally passionate. Absolutely. It's just that they're driving those ships. so that is tricky. But the more conversations we can have like this, I think the more conversations we can have generally, and the more information we can share, the better. I'm very well aware that we've been talking for more than an hour, and so I'm going to let you go. But I just want to say thank you so much for this. It was fantastic to talk to you.
Brilliant. It was really nice to meet you as well.
Yeah, likewise. And hopefully we can do more chatting about this kind of stuff, because, you know, I'm fascinated by the work that Slunglow make. So just give us your web address quickly so that people can go and check out your work.
Slunglow.org.
Slunglow.org. And you're based in?
South Leeds.
South Leeds. So anybody who is, especially in the creative world, and wants to go and, you know, take part in, get involved with the work that you make, and work at the Hub and contribute to you, should totally do that.
Brilliant.
Alan, thanks so much, and have a brilliant day.
Thank you very much. Bye.